Adolf Hitler trusted him completely. The German High Command believed every single word he said. He received Nazi Germany's highest military honor, the Iron Cross, personally approved by Hitler himself. But here is the thing. This man was never actually a Nazi spy. He was never even a real spy at all. He was a chicken farmer from Spain who had never received a single day of professional intelligence training in his life. And the information he fed to Hitler, thousands of pages of detailed military reports over 3 years, was almost entirely made up, completely fabricated, invented at a kitchen table in a small apartment in Lisbon and later London. And because Hitler believed every word of it, approximately 150,000 German soldiers were sitting in the wrong country on the most important day of World War II, the day the Allies landed at Normandy, the day that changed everything. One untrained man with a pen, an imagination, and extraordinary nerve had just pulled off the greatest deception in the history of modern warfare. His name was Juan Pujol García, and almost nobody has heard of him. Juan Pujol García was born in Barcelona in 1912 into a comfortable middle-class Spanish family. By the time he was in his 20s, he had watched Spain tear itself apart in a brutal civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people and left the country traumatized and divided. He had been forced to serve on both sides of that conflict at different points, drafted first by the Republicans and then finding himself with the nationalists, and the experience left him with one consuming absolute conviction. He hated fascism with every part of himself. He hated what it did to people. He hated what it did to countries. And when World War II began and Nazi Germany started consuming Europe country by country, Juan Pujol García made a decision that by any rational measure was completely insane. He decided, entirely on his own initiative, with no training, no contacts, no resources, and no experience, that he was going to personally destroy Adolf Hitler's intelligence network from the inside. The first problem was that nobody wanted his help. In 1941, Pujol approached the British embassy in Madrid and offered to become a spy for Britain. He explained his reasoning. He explained his motivation. He was turned away. The British intelligence services had no way to verify who he was, didn't trust a random walk-in civilian from a neutral country, and weren't interested. Most people in that situation would have gone home and accepted reality. Pujol did the opposite. He decided that if the British wouldn't use him, he would make himself so valuable that they would have no choice. And the way he would do that was by first becoming a spy for Germany. He walked into the German intelligence service, the Abwehr, and told them he was a fanatically pro-Nazi Spanish government official with access to high-level contacts and a plan to travel to Britain and set up a spy network there. Every single element of this story was a lie. He had no government position, no contacts, and no plan to go to Britain. But he was convincing. He was intelligent. And the Germans were desperate for reliable human intelligence sources inside Britain. They recruited him, gave him a code name, Arabelle, and sent him off to begin his network. What they did not know was that Pujol had no intention of ever working for them. He was going to use the access they had just given him to destroy them. Rather than going to Britain, Pujol settled in Lisbon, Portugal, a neutral city that was absolutely crawling with spies from every nation, and began sending his German handlers detailed intelligence reports about British military movements, troop dispositions, and strategic plans. The reports were extraordinary in their detail and specificity, locations, unit numbers, names, dates. The Germans were thrilled. They had no way of knowing that every single word was invented. Pujol was sitting in Lisbon, writing fiction, using a tourist guide to Britain, a Spanish military handbook, and a map of the London Underground as his primary research materials. He had never set foot in England in his life. He invented an entire network of sub-agents, 14 of them eventually, all completely fictional people that he made up, gave personalities and backstories to, and reported on to his German handlers as if they were real operatives sending him real information from real locations across Britain. He described one fictional agent as a commercial traveller in Liverpool, another as a Welsh nationalist with a burning hatred of the English, another as a waiter in a London hotel frequented by military officers who overheard conversations. Each one had a distinct voice, each one had a distinct set of contacts and capabilities. Pujol wrote their reports, managed their fictional expenses, described their movements, and occasionally had them fall sick or complain about the difficulty of their work because he understood instinctively that the Germans would trust a source more if it occasionally pushed back or reported difficulties rather than delivering perfectly clean intelligence every single time. In 1942, the British intelligence services became aware that German radio traffic was referencing a highly active and apparently extremely well-placed spy network operating inside Britain, and they couldn't figure out who it was or how it had been established without their knowledge. This was deeply alarming. Then a naval intelligence officer named Desmond Bristow began analyzing the German reports more carefully and noticed something peculiar. The intelligence being attributed to this mystery network was detailed and convincing in its structure, but occasionally contained subtle factual errors that would only be obvious to someone actually living in Britain. A reference to the wrong train service, an incorrect description of a geographic feature, small things that a person working from a tourist guide and a map rather than lived experience would get slightly wrong. British intelligence realized with a combination of astonishment and relief that whoever was running this network was not actually in Britain at all. They were inventing it from somewhere else. They found Pujol in Lisbon, and this time, when he offered his services, they didn't turn him away. They brought him to London, gave him the codename GARBO, after Greta Garbo, because his handlers felt he was the greatest actor they had ever encountered, and set him up in a house in North London with a radio operator and a direct line of communication to his German handlers. For the next 3 years, GARBO became the most important and most elaborately managed double-agent operation in British intelligence history. Everything he sent to the Germans was carefully crafted by a team that included GARBO himself, his British handler Thomas Harris, and senior figures from M15. The goal was to keep the Germans completely convinced that GARBO and his network were their most reliable intelligence asset in Britain, so that when the critical moment came, the disinformation the British needed the Germans to believe would be delivered through a source Hitler's intelligence service trusted absolutely. And that critical moment was coming. By 1944, the Allies were planning the largest and most complex military operation in human history, the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe through the beaches of Normandy in northern France. The success or failure of that operation depended on a single factor above all others. If the Germans correctly identified Normandy as the landing site and concentrated their armoured divisions there in advance, the invasion would fail with catastrophic loss of life. If the Germans could be convinced that the real landing was coming somewhere else, specifically the Pas-de-Calais region, the shortest crossing point between England and France, and held their armoured reserves back from Normandy, the landings had a genuine chance. The entire Allied deception operation, codenamed Fortitude, existed to make the Germans believe the Pas-de-Calais lie, and GARBO was its most important instrument. Throughout the months before June 1944, GARBO and his fictional network fed the Germans a continuous stream of intelligence designed to build up a picture of a massive Allied army group, the entirely fictitious 1st United States Army Group, supposedly commanded by General George Patton, assembling in southeast England opposite the Pas-de-Calais. Fake radio traffic was generated, fake unit insignia were created, fake supply depots were constructed from materials that looked convincing from the air. And through all of it, GARBO's reports connected the dots for his German handlers, confirming again and again that the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, and that any landings elsewhere were feints and distractions. Then came June 6, 1944, D-Day. The Allies landed at Normandy. For a brief, terrifying window of hours, the entire deception was in danger of unraveling. If the Germans correctly identified Normandy as the real landing and moved their panzer divisions immediately, the Allied forces on the beaches, many of whom were pinned down under devastating fire and barely clinging to the shoreline, might have been thrown back into the sea. Everything depended on what Hitler and his commanders believed in those first critical hours. GARBO transmitted one of the most consequential messages in the history of intelligence. Working through the night, he sent his German handlers a detailed analysis arguing that the Normandy landings were exactly what the Allies wanted the Germans to think they were, a large-scale diversion designed to draw German reserves away from the Pas-de-Calais before the real main invasion force landed there. He cited his agents' reports. He cited troop dispositions.